Gisela Stuart was chair of the official Vote Leave campaign, which 2 years ago succeeded in persuading the British people to vote for Brexit. It was hard to imagine a less likely figure in this role. Gisela is German by birth, and not only was she a Labour MP, she was a firm supporter of the passionately pro-EU Tony Blair. Yet she is perhaps now best known as the woman who, standing alongside Boris Johnson, told a mass audience in Wembley Arena that Britain had to take back control from the EU. So Gisela, how did you become so disenchanted with the European Union that ultimately you campaigned for Britain to leave it?
Almost taking in reverse order, I ended up campaigning to leave because David Cameron asked the question. And therefore, I had to take a stance. I couldn't just say there are all kinds of things which have gone wrong with the European Union. But his question crystallised that I had to take a position.
Why were you originally, or when you first came to this country, presumably enthusiastic about what was then called the European Community? It later became the EU. There must have been a time when you were very happy with it all.
You have to understand that for a post-World War II young German, the European Union was the means by which the nation redeemed itself. So when I first came to Manchester in 1974, Manchester City with a significant Jewish community, I can tell you it was not very popular to be a German. Indeed, there was a moment when someone came to apologise to me because he'd been buying books in the bookshop I worked, and he said, I had told myself I would never knowingly speak to a German for the rest of my life. So
was he Jewish?
He was Jewish. His entire family died in the camps. So that's the bit about the Germans. To them, without any hesitation, they used German interests and European interests interchangeably. It meant I had no problems or misgivings about the European Union. But it really started back in the early 2000s when the European Union arrived of its own accord at the conclusion that there was a democratic deficit, that they were losing touch with its people. And their suggested answer to that problem was to convene a convention on the future of Europe.
You were a British parliamentary delegate to this convention on the European Constitution. What, as a delegate, did you witness which clearly changed your mind about the nature of the EU and Britain's role in it?
Two things happened. One was I thought we had quite a number of the broader principles agreed. And then in the last 72 hours, literally, the foreign minister idea suddenly was back again, even though which we'd said we didn't want
the idea that the EU should have its own foreign minister setting foreign policy for the EU.
Indeed. That the EU would require its own legal personality. As a parliamentarian, there were three things I needed from this document. One was that we removed the phrase ever closer union. The second one was that there should be a proper mechanism for powers to go to the centre and then away again from the centre. And thirdly, I wanted an explicit clause on how you would leave the Union. The British government did not think it was a priority. And they finally gave way because I kept insisting. But they turned it into an expulsion clause. So the clause in the original constitutional draft actually then said any country that failed to ratify the constitution within 2 years would be asked to leave. And everybody thought this will teach the Brits because they expected us to have the biggest problem. Of course, what then happened in reality is that the French rejected it in a referendum, then the Dutch rejected it in the referendum.
By a big majority.
By big majorities. And of course, by the nature of the European Union, neither France nor the Netherlands were asked to leave the European Union. They rehashed the paper, turned it into the Lisbon Treaty, and turned the expulsion clause into Article 50.
Oh, so it's all your fault, Gisela.
Well, to me, if it's a democratic institution which you can join, it must have a mechanism by which you leave.
As a result of your activities, which were not what the then Blair government wanted, but you were a Labour MP in it, did you pay a price domestically, politically, for what you did?
I did. But every politician knows that dissent comes at a price. What I did not expect was there was massive personal hostility. There was a moment when the then chief whip, Jeff Hoon, essentially just screamed at me for 10 minutes.
What were your feelings when David Cameron called the referendum? Did you think he was right to do so, or if not, why not?
I was livid. I was absolutely livid, because I think in a parliamentary democracy, you should use direct participatory democracy with great care. And therefore, I thought it was right to have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, where you had two clear options. You either remain with the status quo, or you go with the Lisbon Treaty, which introduces greater qualified majority voting, all those kind of things. The voters have a clear choice. When politicians call a referendum because they cannot bridge divides within their own party, I think then they're almost opting out what their job is. The truth is, when the referendum was called, I originally did not want to take part. And it was David Owen who reminded me that my day job was a politician. We're having the once-in-a-generation opportunity to make a decision, and I couldn't just say, I'm going home. If David Cameron had come back with a deal which said the European Union now recognises permanently that the construction will include countries which have a single currency and countries which don't, I would have said, you know what, you could probably give that a try. To me, it was the European Union needed to change. But once he asked for nothing, he got nothing. That's when I then had to say, well, in that case, we go, we leave.
But you didn't have to take such an extraordinarily leading position in it. You became a principal figure in it.
You're now arguing against my nature. I mean, I'm either going to do it and then I do it to the best of my ability, or I don't do it. There was one moment which, to me to this day, was probably the worst day of the entire campaign. And that was after the tremendous tragedy of Jo Cox being murdered. And we stopped campaigning.
You knew her, I imagine.
Yes, I did. What was so extraordinary about Jo Cox was she was the only one of all the MPs who, when the referendum was called, came up to me and said, I'm intrigued. Why are you taking that particular stance? And I said, I'll send you a couple of articles which explain that. And I did. And she came back and she said, I can now see why you're doing it. I disagree with you, but I can see why you're doing it. So we stop campaigning after her murder. We go away and Parliament comes back on the Monday. And we had a special session in the chamber. And I could hear people saying, muttering, you killed Jo Cox. That was the accusation.
You being Gisela?
Yeah, that we, the Leave campaign, and me in particular as a representative, were responsible for her murder.
When this man stabbed and shot her to death, he cried out, keep Britain independent. I mean, you can sort of understand why these people were saying this to you.
We should have all said this was wrong, whatever, and not then say it was one side having given permission for hatred. The really difficult thing was the House meets, and I said to various people, including Boris and Michael, we must be in the chamber for that. We are not hiding. We must be in there.
So you said that?
Yeah.
I was told at the time that Boris Johnson and Michael Gove were really shattered by this murder, and that you were in fact the one to say, you've got to pull yourselves together, this is not connected, and that it was you who sort of put a bit of backbone into them, even though you were the one who knew her.
Well, I kind of regarded it as my job to do that.
The criticism of the Vote Leave campaign was you did not think yourself about exactly what leaving would mean institutionally, diplomatically, financially. I mean, did you have, Gisela, a very, very clear idea of what would have to be done and how you would do it?
I had a clear idea of what leaving would look like and how you would have to unravel certain legal processes. But I really was quite shocked because, just think about it, when there's a general election, there'll be somewhere a small group of civil servants charged to look at the party manifestos and prepare for that party to meet. During the Scottish referendum, whilst the government didn't make any proper preparations because they were afraid of freedom of information requests, there was still a lot of work going on about what would happen if you had a Scottish referendum which said we're leaving, you had a prime minister who calls a referendum, whom as a government makes no preparations and even forbids that any preparations are made.
Do you not think just because they didn't really think that they were going to lose and therefore there would be Brexit, and even at the moment of triumph of the campaign, it seemed that your Conservative colleagues looked a bit befuddled and shattered, and you were the person who stood up and spoke at that moment of victory. Were you in fact the only person in the campaign who believed you were going to win?
No, we did that deliberately because we knew that whatever the result, but particularly if you had a Leave result, it would immediately lead to speculations about Tory leadership. Hence, we made the decision that both Boris and Michael would stay in London. I would go up to Manchester, receive the official result.
And lo and behold, you did win. Did that make things even worse in terms of your relationships with parliamentary colleagues?
If things were difficult before the referendum, the tsunami of abuse was quite extraordinary. So we had death threats.
Death threats?
Yeah, which the police had to investigate. The nastiest emails came from women in Germany. They just thought that I had betrayed the post-war German generation by having campaigned to leave. My children had to close down their Facebook accounts for a period. One of my sons was telling the story of going back to work and people being in tears saying, "Your mum has just destroyed my future." I don't think the Westminster bubble fully appreciates that every time you hurl abuse at the key people of the Leave campaign, you are indirectly abusing 17.4 million people who voted to leave. 2 years on, you have people almost whispering it to you as if they're revealing a secret, saying, "I voted leave." It is still seen as a irrational choice. And if I voted Remain, I'm by definition a better person than those who voted leave.
Do you have any principal regrets about what you did?
No, I don't have about that at all. Looking back, I'd make two observations. One is the referendum was the logical conclusion of the Maastricht opt-outs. We weren't going to be part of a single currency and we weren't going to be part of the Schengen, the free travel area. So the minute a core number of countries introduced a single currency, they needed to do things which kind of left us out in that sense. And the other thing is a more sort of deep psychological observation. I've now realised that the trouble with the relationship between the UK and the European Union is that both sides go through phases when they think that the other one has finally become like them. It's like the married couple who go, "If only you could be more like me." The Euro countries need the integration, and the British were never going to be part of that journey.
Gisela Stuart, thank you very much.